Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final concurrent session of ASFPM 2021, session J4 on geospatial data advancements, workflows, and tools. My name is Michael Grasso. I'm a program manager with CDM Smith and a member of the Compass JV, and I'll be the moderator for this session. We have three great presentations for you today, and I'm happy that you've all tuned in to watch them. I do want to encourage everyone to type your questions in as you think of them. Please don't wait until the end to try to quickly type them in. Just type them in as you think of them and we will queue them up. And our first presentation today comes from Hope Morgan and co-presenter Marcia Tobin with AECOM. And this is on the impact of ongoing collection of high resolution LiDAR and the public understanding of what that all means. Our main presenter, Hope, has been working in remote sensing for 23 years. She currently serves as the lead for AECOM's geospatial domain. Her past experience includes collecting LiDAR for an entire state, which amounted to more than 5 million structures, and working with GIS applications for floodplain mapping and gauge readings, as well as hazard risk information. With that, I welcome Hope and Marcia, and here is their presentation.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session. We're very excited to be here today and very happy that you've joined us. I'm Marcia Tobin with AECOM, and I am joined today by Hope Morgan, who you'll be hearing more from shortly. Today, we're going to be talking about high-resolution LiDAR. Hope and I were curious about the users of this data. We have a pretty good idea of who's using it. And we wanted to talk to them further about how they're using it. What kinds of problems or challenges are they using LiDAR for to help them solve in their communities? What kinds of approaches are they taking? And we also wanted to talk to them about partnerships. Who are they working with, if anyone? What are those? What are their organizations? Is it within their own organizations? How are those partnerships proceeding? Are they beneficial? And what sorts of challenges have they faced? So we're excited to talk to you about this and our findings today. As an urban planner, I work with cities and communities to reduce risk from hazards, particularly flooding, in riverine and coastal environments. A large part of this work is about building preparedness, reducing risk, and facilitating quicker recovery. We interviewed these individuals from a range of different organizations, regional planning organizations, flood control districts, counties, cities, USGS, FEMA, and other companies. And we want to thank everyone for their contributions, for taking the time to talk to us and really give us a lot of good detail and stories about their experiences and further information that is very useful and you'll hear more about today.
Thanks, Marcia, and thanks everybody for letting us present at ASFPM. As a native North Carolinian, I missed seeing you all in Raleigh, but we will get together real soon. In the meantime, let's talk about LiDAR and how it can really impact end users. So we're going to talk today about some high resolution data as the gift that keeps on giving. LiDAR has a place for everyone. Risk reduction and resiliency and how better data makes better outcomes, partnerships and how they make the world go round, and warnings for being prepared for what comes next. So where are we with high resolution LiDAR? Well, by 2023, USGS is planned to be done with the national data collection for 3DEP, and they are also reached 78% as of end of last year for collection for LiDAR data across the nation, which is very exciting. So some of the things that they talked to us about was using density to determine the needs and the change for where they would collect in the future. Some of the things that they're looking to add for these collections, like bathymetry and the move to 3D HP, which is really including a plan for how streams will be updated for the NHD network. We're also looking at higher resolution data. So as more and more projects are included, as more and more people are collecting data, and as we're realizing we can do more and more with this, the resolution on the data is really getting higher and higher. And that just means that this can be used by multiple partners from anywhere from flooding to utilities to determine poles and connections, for transportation to determine where to move dirt and where to build roads and what the impacts will be for bike trails, and infrastructure. Infrastructure across the board is something that elevations are really moving toward being very helpful at. And the other thing that USGS always brings up is how important the LiDAR data is to the National Risk Register and the tools that are being used for that. There are tons of presentations that USGS has given about where they're moving forward, and I would suggest that you look into getting more information. So let's talk about technology and what do I need to know? And I'm taking this as a perspective as an end user, really for technological advances. So quality level data that you're looking at for normal collections is anywhere between 2 and 8 points per square meter, but the capability is there to do 30 to 100 plus points per square meter, and to do it in the same time frame that they do the 2 to 8 points per square meter collection. Bathymetry is another place that has advanced significantly, and really the capability to tie the ground surface to the underwater surface is something that many people are looking at and is something that is highly used now. And then photon, the ability to collect a large scale area where you get information up the sides of structures. I think that's something that has really would really benefit many groups. Software accessibility. When we first started down this path, software was not really available to manipulate this data in a way that was easy for most end users to do. And now those capabilities are there. It's in many sets of software and in open sets of software. So this is something that end users really have the capability of doing. And terrain creation improvements in those software packages, data format improvements have been a real benefit in utilizing the data more efficiently in the systems. And then all of that has driven data modeling advances to be able to use those sets of information more efficiently. System advancements is something that we really have to focus on. As part of projects, you have got to plan for the architecture to maintain and store and keep all of these data sets. And the cloud's one of the big things that's coming up to really be able to handle this. So not only is it really cost effective in the storage, but it handles your processing much more efficiently, and it makes it more timely to process. And all of this ends up with happy end users. And I'll let you define end user in the way you want, because those end users are going to be happy with these advancements no matter what. So LiDAR really does have a place for everyone. There are federal collections and partners that have put together this capability of doing these large-scale collections. That's true for state and local governments as well. And then what's great is those collections of groups often work together to make sure that they're getting the most efficient collection. Amazing process. Partners are your friends. Creativity and the capability to create new applications, to create new ways of using this data, that's really been significant over the last couple of years, understanding that a lot of vendors are putting new information out there that they have created from the LiDAR data set and the capability to solve problems. And then, of course, the end user derivatives. And this one's really big because this one's important. The more derivatives that we have out there for people to use, and the more derivatives that we have out there for people to use that are publicly available, the more that we're going to be able to use this information to solve multiple problems. So really having those derivatives that have some sort of standardization and some sort of process behind them is really going to be helpful for the future. At the bottom of the page, I've actually put connections to where data is available. These were provided by USGS, and there's lots of tools and technologies out there for understanding this data. So there's brochures from USGS, and there's tools that have been created by NOAA, lots of places to really get invested in LiDAR wherever it fits best for you. So where does LiDAR live in our project? So there's a couple big things that I want to talk about. One is CNMS. So CNMS is the stream network that's collected to basically measure the floodplain mapping program accomplishments, what they have completed for floodplain mapping across the nation. And CNMS actually hit 80% of the stream networks in InView last year, which was a big milestone for them and very impressive. The other really cool thing that happened, and I mentioned it before, is that USGS actually collected 78% of the nation as of the end of last year, which is also a huge achievement. But it's really interesting to see how these two things have run into each other. So one, CNMS actually uses the quality level of the data to determine the maturity of the stream networks that they are using within the system. So if you are a tier 3 through 5, you actually have a quality level that is within the standards that USGS has put out for data collection of floodplain mapping. The other thing that I want to show is actually a map. So this map was I created comparing the National Flood Hazard Layer, which is where we have panels by county, to the LIDAR data that has been collected across the nation. And this shows really two big things. It shows where we have data that we don't have panels, and it also shows where we have panels that we don't have data. So you're showing not only places that you need to collect because you don't have panels there, but you do have the capability with the data, but you're also showing you've created panels off of older data sets that may not have the quality that you really want to be using for the floodplain mapping program. So those are the two big goals that I see in the comparison of this data set. So another place that LIDAR lives is in the floodplain mapping program, and that's one place that I'm very familiar with. So it's used everywhere from the discovery and planning process where you're using CNMS and scoping to kind of determine where streams need to be collected, to the data development page where we have terrain and survey that's compared to the elevation and base maps, and then in the modeling where it's actually driving that surface that is helping us create those flood models. But one big place that I want to really focus on is the due process and FIS and firm. So this really gives you the ability to talk to the public and to talk to the people who are using these maps to make them understand what information is available and what it means to them, and sort of focus on that end user. So it's going to allow you to study potential risk. It's going to allow you to understand the impact of your population for cost recovery and the ability to recover, and better resiliency and structural planning. And a really good example of this was Chris Mason from Collier County talked about how it was such a benefit to have that data on hand so that when people walked in to look at the maps and to understand what the map meant and what it means to them in their home, that he could explain that data to them and explain how that information was used to create the maps and how to really keep them safe. So another place LIDAR lives is in emergency management, and this is just a place where this LIDAR could make a huge difference in what's being done. It's used everywhere from storm surge and flood mapping to understand what the water is going to do and where the water is going to go. It is used in response for understanding if transportation is going to be cut off or if things have been impacted in areas. It's used in earthquake. It's used in tornado. It's used in search and rescue. It's used in recovery as part of how are we going to recover from this area and what are those costs going to be associated. And that actually leads to the quote we have on this page from Jason Ray in Florida, really talking about how the LIDAR has benefited other areas outside of EM, conservation, beach renourishment, hurricanes, navigable waterways, very exciting usage. And then the last one is really in the mitigation side and really understanding stormwater and wastewater impacts and then buyouts at the end of any event. So now I want to give you some examples from our fantastic interviewers and how they're using LIDAR in these different areas. I've got some quotes here, but I want to tell you a couple stories. So one is Chris Mason with Collier County really talked about how they're using it for CRS 540 and drainage concerns, and really using those elevations to determine drainage areas and also determine areas for capital improvement. The next story I want to tell you is actually from Ben McFarland with the Hampton Roads Planning District out of Virginia. And he tells about the story of how sea level rise was never really possible. They used the national digital elevation models off of quads before they had LIDAR, but the analysis just couldn't give them the answers that they needed. And now the density of the data really provides them what they need to make some of those sea level rise decisions that are coming up on us so quickly. In North Carolina, they actually talked about LIDAR being scientific data. So they had a huge set of appeals that came in all at one time because a county had basically gone in, used the LIDAR data that was not used in the study that was done for their area, and did a mass appeal to say, these are all the structures that we think are out of the floodplain. And even though it did cause a little bit of delay, it's people really using the process correctly and getting the information that they need to build those floodplains out the way they needed. And the last example I want to give you is actually Alice Wilson out of the city of New Bern in North Carolina. And the things that they are doing with LiDAR are super impressive. So they're doing it for Redevelopment Commission to determine areas of study and areas for redevelopment. They're using it for planning historic downtown. And if they put in a structure, what is that going to mean for heights and impacts? They're using it on the engineering side to determine stormwater changes and adjustments that need to be made. They're using it in emergency response to really understand kind of the gauge levels and the gauge information that's provided. And that all leads to risk and resiliency, which I'm going to let Marcia talk about.
This is a fairly typical process for climate adaptation and resilience planning. Each step in this process relies on defensible data. And so if we start at the top with the climate change scenarios, we might, for example, be taking the 1% chance storm and thinking about, under changing climate conditions, would those storms be happening with greater frequency? Would they be of greater magnitude? And possibly looking at different changes, different elevations for storm surge. All of this would rely on good LiDAR data to understand elevations and how they might potentially change. Step 2 is a vulnerability assessment process where one would look at the critical buildings or assets in a community and understand it's very important to know what's the physical elevation of those buildings, what's the physical elevation of the surrounding landscape, and how is water moving and changing movement within those surroundings. So what's the exposure of these buildings? That's what this would be telling us. Then, as we're developing the adaptation measures and mitigation measures, which would be in step 5, LiDAR again is very critical. What is the first floor elevation of buildings? What should it be to get above that 100-year floodplain or above the storm surge that may be changing with more intense storms? And then finally, once we've developed those mitigation measures, data, especially LiDAR, is very important for determining how successful these mitigation measures are and what kinds of changes, what kinds of adaptive measures and changes might be made using LiDAR to determine changes in elevation. Another lens through which to view resilience is a framework that FEMA has been using called community lifelines. Community lifelines are these vital components that are essential for human health and safety, as well as continuous operation of critical business functions and economic stability. So LiDAR provides critical information on, as I was saying in the previous slide, potential exposure of buildings and assets, critical facilities such as hospitals, shelters, schools, as well as roads and transportation. LiDAR is also in line with many of the guiding principles of the new grant program through FEMA, Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, also known as BRIC. Out of the grant applications that were received in January of this year, the first time applications were open, the top project types requested are elevations. Next are flood control, acquisitions, and relocation, which all are enhanced and more robust if LiDAR data is used through the planning, design, and implementation processes. And since all 50 states, territories, federally recognized tribes, and the District of Columbia are eligible to apply for the grant program, BRIC, the access to high quality, high density LiDAR is essential for the resilience of the nation. A very important ingredient for the successful application of LiDAR are partnerships. For example, as Sue Buto from USGS told us, it wouldn't have been possible to map nearly 80% of the nation if it hadn't been for partners. Working together expands the amount of analysis and work that can be accomplished. It also provides consistent methods, a way of sharing consistently, and data sharing amongst partners, as well as lessons learned. A common sentiment from many of the professionals we interviewed, including Harris County Flood Control District and Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, was how partners from other departments, municipalities, and communities within a region work together. Key to the success in these partnerships was communication and listening to each unique individual and their specific issues or approaches, and then developing methods to work together that were consistent across the board. In the case of Harris County, which is quite flat in its topography, has very poor draining soils, clay soils, and intense storms, sometimes up to 7 or 8 inches an hour, what one part of the district does will very much impact another part. So working together and not competing with each other is something that is very critical to their success. And finally, partnerships enable training opportunities. In each of these cases, partners gathered together and developed training materials that then are available for other partners, for others who may be interested, or individuals who may be want to learn more about LiDAR and how to use it. So without these partnerships, these training programs probably wouldn't have been as robust and useful to as many users.
So now that Marcia has told you about resiliency and partnerships, let's talk a little bit about warning areas. So these are the things that you really have to watch out for. You have got to be prepared for the system. And we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but this is not just a collection issue. This is any project that is going to use LiDAR and any project that is going to use large-scale terrain surfaces, you have got to have a plan for how that's going to be incorporated into the project. And you have to have a plan for how it's going to be maintained and how the system might adjust over time. So these are things that must be a part of your conversation. You also need to make sure that you're not asking people to email you LiDAR. They can't do that. You also need to make sure that you have a computer that can process the level of data that you need. And again, some of those cloud advancements are really going to help you out, and they're fairly easy to set up. And then with higher resolution, me as a LiDAR lover, I want to tell you to get in there and play with that data and see what it'll do. But you need to make sure that you understand when you're pulling down those tiles that it is increasing your storage, your file manipulation, any analysis that you're doing, it is going to increase that, and you just need to have a plan. So my next warning is actually the National Spatial Reference System changes that are coming up in 2022, and there's 3. There is the change in the datum going to 2022. There's the change in state plane coordinates, and they are deprecating the U.S. survey foot. So they're changing where they're measuring the world from, which is going to change your horizontal and your vertical, but they're also adding velocity, which means if you're doing data collections, it's going to be based on the day that you did it so that it has that time measurement with it. Tons of information from NGS is out there about the datum conversion. They've done a great job with their webinars to actually provide information about what these changes mean. I highly suggest going to their website and seeing more information about that. The state plane projections, all of those were due into NGS at the beginning of this year in the spring. So all of that is in place and is moving forward. And then the U.S. survey foot, if you do have U.S. survey foot as part of the work that you're doing, just know that the new software and the new state plane projections will not be based on U.S. survey foot. They will be based on international foot, and all of the tools will actually use international foot. So you'll still be able to get that information, but international foot will be the federal standard from this point. This is actually a pretty big deal because many states legislatively have written in that the U.S. survey foot is what is to be used. So there's going to have to be some legislative changes to get that incorporated. The way that we're going to keep track of all of this is metadata. Metadata is your friend. There are again new suggestions from NGS about metadata for survey collection, but if you are using LiDAR data or if you are using GIS data sources that are based off of LiDAR, you're going to need to make sure that that metadata speaks to all of the new information required by the new datum change. So, my last warning is a little bit of politics. You are going to have to explain all those little dots to the powers that be. And there's some states that have gone to great strides to actually make this happen. So, there is legislation in South Carolina that talks about updating the LIDAR every 7 years. Again, they've really shown the benefit of what that LIDAR provides to all of the different programs involved, from floodplain mapping to emergency management to environment and natural resources. You're going to have to show the fiscal benefits, and there's tools out there that can help you with that. The links listed below in this slide actually give you some examples, even state by state, of how this data is being used throughout that would help with that. Partnerships really make a huge difference. So not only are you validating the need for the data because you have so many people at the table, you also normally get the eye of the higher ups because you have so many people at the table. And then you're spreading the wealth, right? So you're getting that information and providing this information across multiple groups or agencies, which means it's just a better value for the dollar that you're spending. And then last, small steps make great strides in knowledge. So having that data, doing some simple analysis, running some simple comparisons, what impacts can be, that's going to really show in a small scale what could happen at a large scale. So take the effort to really kind of produce some small scale things, start testing the data out and see what it can produce for you and how you can use it throughout. The more things that you can do with the data, the more value that it will show. And just giving examples is really going to be a benefit. So here we are at the end, and there's a couple things I want to leave you with. One, high resolution data is the gift that keeps on giving. It is used in so many ways, shapes, and forms. It is used in so many different technologies and capabilities, and it really can answer tons of questions for all sorts of different groups. But the technology is ever advancing. You're going to have to be careful. You're going to have to make sure you understand what that data means and also understand what you need for the projects that you're producing. LIDAR really does have a place for everybody. If you're not a collection person, that's okay. You may be a digital elevation model person. You may be a GIS person who's interested in some raster calculation differences. You may be somebody in a quarry who's actually doing volume counts. These are all places for everyone. And really making those end user derivative products is going to bring such benefit to so many people. And it's really something that's worthwhile. And then last but not least, partnerships really do make the world go round. The more people you can bring into a project, the bigger bang you have for the buck, the more availability you have of data to multiple groups of people, and the more value you're showing to politicians and legislators and people who are making some of these decisions about collecting this data. So make sure you make some friends. And I want to say thank you to all of our friends, the people that we interviewed. It was such a benefit. Learning from you was such a great time. And I really appreciate all you shared with us. And I look forward to meeting with you all face to face in the future. Y'all take care and let us know if you have any questions.
Well, thank you, Hope and Marcia, for walking through some of the key impacts that LIDAR data has had. We do have a few questions that have come in. We'll go ahead and start to ask those. The first one was from John Hayes, and he was asking, how do we find out if there's coverage in our area and how to get it? What are some of the sources for that?
Sure. So there were some links that I provided in the presentation, but if you go to NOAA.gov and look at the coastal information, they actually have all of the LIDAR data there. And those, like I said, those links are available and you can see all the information that's available, what year it was created, who created it, and all the metadata behind it.
Thank you. Another question from Diana came in. LIDAR data acquisition, processing, release, it's a moving target. The opportunities to bring in new data are at the start of modeling and the start of mapping. So if the topographic data used for a study and or for mapping is appealable, at what point or under what circumstances could the appeal be denied?
So just like having information from a surveyor for your location, if you have better data that has been proven for your area, you can do an appeal on your map. So LIDAR fits into that category. If you have validated quality control data and you can bring that in and actually show that it is better information that is on the map, then you can either do one of the processes that FEMA provides, a LOMAR or LOMAC, to actually show the new information in those maps. So I don't know that there's actually a limit. You're normally better in the process of production to get that data as soon as possible. I don't know that there's a nice line in the sand to actually say we have to go back and use this new information. And there is sort of a tipping point in the production process where you're almost better off to let that become appeal as opposed to part of the production process. It's really sort of time dependent on when the data comes in and where it comes in.
Thanks, Hope. There was a question there on the source for the data on your LiDAR coverage map, and somebody noted that it didn't look accurate for Kansas. Can you talk about the source of your LiDAR?
So the source, yeah, that was the 3-depth map. And I did not, I did actually get rid of some of the information that was before 2009. So there may actually be some information that is out there. And there also were some changes this year that were not included in that. So that is the actual coverage layout from the USGS for what data is in process or is complete. So it also does not include any of the planned data.
Very good. I had a question, really not, oh, we are out of time. Well, thank you, Hope and Marcia. And we're going to go ahead and move on to our second presentation. This comes from Andrew MacDonald and his co-presenter Nick Turner on an introduction to open source GIS software, QGIS. Andrew has a BS in environmental spatial analysis from University of North Georgia. He started his professional career working on Atlanta gas light pipelines. And for the past 4 years, he's been working with Atkins in their FEMA floodplains division as a GIS analyst and a deputy project manager for projects covering regions 4, 5, 7, and 9 FEMA regions. And here is Andrew's presentation.
Hi, my name is Andrew MacDonald, and this is Introducing QGIS to Communities as a Free and Open Source Tool for Floodplain Management. The objectives of this presentation are for community members to be able to download their flood risk data and subsequently pull it into GIS in order to view and analyze that data, and also to get a better understanding of how GIS can help in local floodplain management. The GIS software we will be focusing on is QGIS, since it is both free and open source. QGIS, or Quantum GIS, is a free GIS software that anyone can download with a lot of the same mapping, editing, and geoprocessing capabilities as major proprietary software such as ArcMap. It also runs on most of the major operating systems such as Windows, Mac, Linux, and Android. This is great for communities or individuals who wish to be able to view or edit GIS data for little to no cost. Not only is QGIS free, it's also an open source software. This means that it has a GPL, or general public license, wherein the copyright holder makes the source code available to the user to be able to manipulate and redistribute the software to anyone and for any reason. That may sound daunting, but in fact there are quite a few major programs that are open source already, such as Firefox and Linux. Because QGIS allows for general public licensing, the software itself is constantly being peer-reviewed by its users, so it's constantly being improved upon. So one can make the case that QGIS is actually more reliable than some proprietary software simply because if there is an issue with QGIS or one of its tools, any user can fix the issue, and if he or she wanted, make the improved source code available online for the QGIS users for free. Or if coding isn't your strong suit, then the user can raise the issue online and see if another person a bit more skilled in coding can fix the issue. Online forums such as QGIS and Stack Exchange are great for this, and oftentimes the issue has already been raised and the question has already been answered. There are also groups users can join on the QGIS website that can help, as well as training materials, guidelines, and documentation for usage. QGIS is also operated by multiple vendors, so it's a bit harder to get locked into specific terms and agreements. And QGIS is also pretty transparent, not only about its coding, but also its usages and its donors and sponsors. So here, if we go to the QGIS page, you can, this is the download page. So here you can download the latest and greatest version of QGIS. So right now I have the Windows version open up right now, but if I scroll down, you can go here and download it for Mac or Linux, BSD, or you can download it as an app for Android. If we go over to the documentation tab, you can download the user guides, the training manuals. Looks like here they have a general introduction for QGIS, so that'll for beginners that would probably be great. It looks like they have some information here available for writing Python for GIS or maybe C++. If we go over to Get Involved tab, you can see their donations list, their sponsors lists, different developments. You can see the meetings and probably join in on some of the meetings or listen in on those. If we go over to the users tab here, and then go down to the users groups, you can see the different user groups that are available in the different regions. So I'm sure if someone is interested, they can join one of these user groups, or at the very least, if you have a question, maybe raise it to one of the groups here. And they also have the some more training materials here. So once you get QGIS downloaded, this is going to be your blank screen. So down here on the bottom is the status bar. This will show you the coordinate system you're in, as well as the zoom level you're at. Once you actually pull in data, your table of contents is here. So the data it'll pull in here, but then it will also pull into the viewer screen here. And to be able to pull in data itself, you would go to this layer tab up top and hit Add Layer. And for the most part, the FEMA GIS data is shapefile, so that's vector data. So you would hit Add Layer, Add Vector Data. Or if you wanted to look at a DEM, a terrain file, lidar, or some form of imagery, you would hit this Add Raster Layer here. You can navigate to your data that way also. To run actual tools, if you're running it on the vector data, like the shapefiles, you would go to your vector tab here, and then here you have your geoprocessing tools, geometry tools, various data management analysis tools. This is kind of your defaults. Same with the raster. So if you want to run a tool on maybe some imagery you pulled in, or analyze a DEM or some other terrain file that you have brought in, you would go to this raster tab here, and try and find the tool you're looking for here. You can also go to the processing tab and hit toolbox. That'll give you a few more outside of the general defaults that are there, and that will show up here. So this is a slew of other toolboxes that are available for your vector and raster data. And if for whatever reason you can't find the data, or I'm sorry, a tool available that you want here or in your defaults tabs up here, what you can do is go to the plugins tab and hit manage and install plugins. And that will connect you to the QGIS Online. And here you can find a variety of other tools and extensions that people have created and uploaded to the QGIS website. So chances are there's probably something available for you if you can't find what you are looking for in the at least in the QGIS defaults. So you can peruse these. Each one of these has a um, description of what the tool does. So for the most part, we're really going to be focusing on the FEMA GIS data. The FEMA floodplain products are split up into two categories, regulatory and non-regulatory, both of which can be found on the FEMA Map Service Center, or MSC. Regulatory products include the FIRM database, FIRM panels, and flood insurance study, otherwise known as the FIS. These products are used for flood insurance rating and regulation of development in high-risk flood hazard areas. Non-regulatory products are additional products that are that communities can utilize for mitigation purposes, such as changes since last firm, depth grids, areas of repetitive loss, potentially overtopping roadways, culverts, bridges, etc. So if we click on the link here, for those of you that have never been to the FEMA Map Service Center, so this is the homepage, and you can look at, if you wanted to, you can look at flood risk at say a more residential level, or say if you want to look at a house or a building, you can type the address in here, and you can just look at the building and the floodplain it's potentially in, and the BFEs, the base flood elevations, etc. Or if you wanted to, you can go to search all products, and we can go to, say, Alabama. Let's say Etowah County. All jurisdictions within Etowah County. And here we can download or look at the effective products. So here are the latest firm panels that are available for Etowah County. Here you can download the latest flood insurance studies for the county, or here any LOMARs or LOMAs that are within the county, or because we are looking at QGIS, here you would download the actual shapefiles for the county. And if you wanted to also, if there's a study in progress that hasn't gone into effect yet, but it may be about to go into maybe, say, an appeal period or something like that, you can go to the preliminary products and see, look at the data, or here there's a tab where you can go through and look at any of the historic information. And then down here is the flood risk products, and that's the non-regulatory products I was just talking about, like the changes since last firm, or maybe areas of repetitive loss, or maybe some some other areas of mitigation interest for the county. So once you actually once you actually download and pull in your data, like I was saying earlier, the data itself will pull off to the side here and into your table of contents. So here we're looking at, say, a flood hazard areas, profile baseline. So that'll be your stream center lines, your S-firm pan. That'll be your panel layout, your SBFE. That is the whole foot base flood elevations, or down here we have the S cross sections. Those are the cross sections that represent the regulatory water surface elevations. So once you get that all pulled in, for the most part, you'll probably want to go through and separate and symbolize these different layers. So you would right-click on that in the table of contents, hit Properties, go to Symbology, and then you can go through and filter out the different categories. So like right here, we have our flood hazard area separated out by the different flood zones. So here we're looking at AE, our detailed flood areas, A, which is the approximate zone, um, the detailed floodways, and then the 0.2%. And we've got these symbolized per the FEMA guidelines. So our 1% A and A zone, AE and A zones, we have just a simple fill for this aqua color, which is what FEMA uses for the 1%. The floodways, that's going to be a red and blue diagonal stripe here. And then the 0.2%, since it's not technically an SFHA, your 500-year floodplain here is typically symbolized as that orange color. And then you can go to the labels tab here to label each of these different zones. Like right now, because you don't typically see X zones, or rather the X area a minimal flood hazard, anything that is less of a flood hazard than the 0.2% or 500 year, we just have queried out, so it's not labeled at all. But once you go through and have everything symbolized and labeled, you can see it here in the map viewer. So we have our A zone here, our A zone labeled, and it just makes it easier to visualize the data. We did the same thing with cross sections. So these are the black lines here, and so those are currently showing the water surface elevations to the 1/10 of a foot. Like I was saying, so here a moment ago, our floodway here, the red and blue diagonal line. This here is the profile baseline we have symbolized in that kind of dark blue dashed line here. That's the stream center line. And being able to pull this data into QGIS is nice, not only as a visual, but you can, like I was saying earlier, you can use the various tools on this data and use it however your community needs. And you can also view some of the attributes for the data that say maybe doesn't show up in the flood insurance report. So we can open up, say, the flood hazard area here, go to open an attribute table, and we can look at each one of these flood polygons. We have our A zones. If, say, there is not a cross section or a BFE line there, and you may see this a lot more in coastal floodplains, or maybe in some larger lake backwater areas, something like that. But you would have maybe a static BFE instead, and that would show up here. And then you can see the vertical datum that would be used for that, and the measurement for that here. Doesn't look like we have any for the data we're looking at here, but in those cases, that's where that would show up. If you wanted to look at, say, the cross sections a little bit more in depth, same thing. Right click, open an attribute table, and you can see each individual cross section, the stream that it's on, the vertical datum that was used to create it, and the measurement it's in. This here's your stream bed elevation. This here is your regulatory water surface elevation. And for the most part, this is really just going to represent the 1%. But if you wanted to look at some more other information, say regarding the cross sections, um, you can look at this cross section line ID, and there is also an L cross section elevation table. So you can right click on that. Any other tables also show up in the table of contents that aren't necessarily spatial data, but you can line that, look for that same cross section elevation ID here, and say if it's along a floodway, you can see the width of the floodway, um, the cross section area, and other potential events and the elevations for those events. FEMA regulates the 1% event, but a lot of the time we will go through and also create, say, maybe a 10% event or a 4%. Here we have a 2%, the 0.2%. The different water surface elevations during each one of those events. Some other things you say you may want to look at. This is the SPOLAR. This is your political area, your political boundaries. So we can open that up. And you can look at the different communities. And say, maybe if you live in this specific city of Cleveland, we can say zoom there. And you'd be able to see, whatever whatever flood risk area or flood risk is within that the city limit. Here we go. So say we're looking at, say, the city of Helen, the limits here. You can see that there's a flooding and a floodway that goes through the city and the different water surface elevations along the floodway here. So really, um, it's QGIS and GIS in general is just a great tool to be able to pull in this FEMA data and be able to look at it. Um, and really, it's going to be based on whatever your community needs are, how you plan on looking at it, and how you plan on using it. But the GIS data itself is already free and available to the public, and I think QGIS is just a great alternative to maybe one of the GIS softwares that you have to pay for, because QGIS is, like I said, free and open source, and it's got the same capabilities. So you can go through and look at your free FEMA data in the free software. But as of right now, I think that's everything I've got. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Andrew, for an informative presentation on QGIS. It was very interesting. We have several good questions that have come up. I'm going to go ahead and ask these right now. First from Samara Ebinger. Hi, Samara. Have you worked with any specific communities yet to get them started using QGIS as you demonstrate in your presentation? And if so, did you encounter any challenges or notable successes that you can talk about?
I personally haven't. I work more so on the consulting side, on the engineering side, so I don't have a whole lot of interaction with the communities themselves outside of the occasional community meeting. I know we brought this presentation up to the Georgia Floodplain Conference a couple of years ago, and one of the, I don't remember which firm he was from. It might have been may have been AECOM. They were really interested in about doing some using QGIS for outreach with the communities though. But in my personal experience, I haven't actually gotten with any community officials on using this yet. But I do think that it would be a really good tool for communities just because the the these studies are getting more and more database heavy, and there's a lot of data that's stored in the database that you don't normally see on the firms or may not see necessarily in the flood insurance studies. And I know there are quite a bit of communities. I'm up from I'm north of Atlanta, so there's quite a few like rural communities around here that may not have like a specific budget for things like ArcMap, or they don't meet requirements to get like a free ARC license or Esri product. So this is like I said, like I haven't personally had any community, like I haven't interacted with the communities themselves on this, but I think this would be a great way for them to be able to look at that data if, say, they can't get an ARC license just because it is getting more and more, the studies are getting more and more database heavy.
Yeah. Clark Barlow asks if there's a web service for FEMA mapping layers that can be brought into QGIS with layer symbology predefined.
That I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to check on the FEMA website. I don't know if there's a predefined FEMA symbology available or not. I thought there was.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Chase asked if there are any disadvantages to using QGIS instead of ArcGIS products.
So to me, I'm a little biased because I do use ArcMap primarily. It's what I use at work and what I use primarily at school. And to me, QGIS is great because it's open source and you have a lot of flexibility if you know how to, especially if you know coding. I'm a bit rusty on the coding side, and compared to ArcMap, I feel like it is a little bit clunkier and not as user friendly, I guess. Like to me, it's much easier to navigate ArcMap than it was QGIS, but that may be my own bias just from using ArcMap a lot.
Sure. Yep. That makes sense. Functionality is probably quite a bit different with Esri products. Final question here: if QGIS is being continually updated, how often do you feel that you should download the software?
I guess that depends on what your usage is and what the updates are. I know for me it was I got an automatic update whenever they rolled out 3.16, so that you may get it automatically. I don't remember offhand, but I mean, if you I do believe they go through and denote like all the changes and things like that. And right now they go through and actually have like a 2 different variants available at all times. Like right now they have the long-term release, which is 3.16, and then they just came out with a what they refer to as a stable release of 3.18. So if you wanted to, you can go through and download the 3.18, but that's so it's got some more tools and functionality. But it's also a little bit more susceptible to bugs. So I guess that's I guess that's kind of up to the user.
Sure. Yeah, and I think we'll probably we'll touch on this a little bit more in our next session as well. But thank you, Andrew. Appreciate you taking the time to present on this for us. And we're going to go ahead and move into our next presentation now. Third presentation today comes from Eliza Ledwell and her co-presenter Dan Horner on simplifying and automating geospatial data workflows. Eliza has a BS in environmental science from University of Maryland and is the director of GIS solutions for NiyamIT. She currently supports FEMA as the business architect for their pivot program in the Federal Insurance Directorate. And when not supporting FEMA, Eliza likes to spend some time backpacking and kayaking and doing some downhill skiing. So here is Eliza and Dan's presentation.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Dan Horner. Soon we'll be joined by Eliza Ledwell. We both work for NiyamIT, who's been serving the National Flood Insurance Program in FEMA for about 15 years now, specializing in data management, IT development, sustainment, and everything geospatial. Today, we're going to talk to you about simplifying and automating geospatial data workflows. And we'll give a high-level overview of some common data challenges, best practices. Then we'll go into some specific tools, tasks that you might need to complete, and a case study showing the successful implementation of all of this. So let's talk about some common geospatial data challenges. Sometimes our data is in different locations, or even more of a challenge, the same data is in two locations being updated at different times. Perhaps you have one version of your data locally or with a technician, and another set of your data on some kind of more public service, some online location. But being in the cloud or some type of more centralized online environment allows you to scale up to give more of your users authorized access to edit and update the data in one central location. You can also control which versions of the data your larger stakeholder base has access to. And in the event that data must change and be distributed quickly, centralized online hosting transmits the updates to all users at one time. Our data is rarely perfect, especially in the initial iterations. And having those disparate data sources I talked about previously makes the controlling of quality even harder. A close inspection of leveraged data prior to incorporation into your authoritative source is key. And for data you're producing, be sure to build quality into the production process. Automate repeated tasks in both the production and QC space where possible to eliminate the opportunity for error introduction through manual tasks. And resolving errors in your authoritative or parent source, combined with that service-based access I spoke about earlier, ensures that the updates are made once and available to everyone. Data just keeps getting larger every year, and doing some of these simple kind of foundational concepts that I just talked about on larger data sets can be difficult. Perhaps your data is wide in geographic coverage or very feature dense. But typically those large data sets involve more processing steps in the compilation or extraction. Take every opportunity to check your data process flows for errors that might occur along the way. You can also chart or display components of your data in ways that allow you to find inconsistencies other than the classic viewing of geospatial renders. Start small, look closely, and optimize each step along the way, and then make your processes repeatable. Now you can apply your now proven process to your larger, complete data sets. Now that we've discussed the overarching tenets of good data and process management, we can talk through some tips for simplifying and automating your workflows. It might seem obvious to have a good understanding of your data, but take a close look at the intended purpose. Are all the users the same? Or perhaps may some only want to have a clean and simple view of the data, while others want to conduct in-depth analysis. Define what is good data for those purposes. And also consider what accuracy or precision is acceptable and other target levels you might have for your data to confirm success and track accountability for achieving that success. Defining requirements is necessary not just for how the data will be exposed, but also for how it's processed, QC'd, and compiled. For example, are you displaying the data for a state or county? And are you gathering data with the same vertical datum or with the same vertical datum conversion. Analyzing these requirements can allow you to find opportunity to simplify your data flows or automate regularly repeated tasks like converting your vertical datum. And when thinking through how to validate the data against your definition of quality, consider how best to check the data and what a sound sample size would be. These are quality operation requirements. Planning for how you will avoid errors in your data in the first place is paramount. And again, should be considered in all phases of your data production and management, not just after it's produced or compiled. And executing that plan against the data should be completed at a frequency that matches your update or transactional exchange frequency. And here again, through this regular inspection and analysis, you'll find opportunities to simplify and automate, to further eliminate error introduction, or finding the errors early and streamlining the resolution. And now Eliza can walk us through some tools to accomplish these tasks and a successful case study for which all of this was implemented.
Thank you, Dan. Some of the tools that can help us QC, transform, and automate the workflows are FME, Esri, and UiPath. We use FME a lot because it is easy to use. It doesn't require you to know how to code anything, and also it's not too expensive. It is great for multiple data formats. Esri can be heavy and expensive, and there are some open source tools that are available, but Esri is still a world leader in GIS data processing and with useful features and is widely used. So we'll cover some of those capabilities in Esri as well. Another tool that is becoming popular for automation is UiPath. It is a good option for automating tasks that require interacting with multiple websites, entering data into forms. Those types of workflows can be easily automated by creating a robot. The robot can emulate human actions like moving files and folders, populating data into spreadsheets, working with unstructured data, even engage in chats and conversations. If you want to learn more about RPA and UiPath capabilities, you can go to our demo we have in our booth. Now let's look at some of the checks you can do with FME and Esri. This is just some of the checks we have experienced being very useful. So the first one you can check is geometry issues. There are a few geometry problems that can be cleaned up. With FME, you can use the geometry validator transformer. With Esri, you can use the check geometry and repair geometry tools. And if you have the data reviewer extension, there is a polygon sliver check, which can help you clean up the data. This is also, you can clean up some of the slivers with another check. You can set a threshold for the size of the polygon and clean up the too small features that way. If you have a requirement, for example, buildings must be greater than a certain size, similar methodology there, you can use the spatial filters, the attribute filters, and tester filters in FME. You can use the select by attribute in Esri, or if you have the data reviewer, you can use the evaluate polygon parameter and area check. I like using the tester filters and the attribute filters because they're tabular and they run very quick. Another common check you should think about is checking for duplicates. Those can happen as new versions of the data is incorporated and the deletion process failed, or maybe the data got incorporated twice. So in FME, you would use the sorter and duplicate filter transformer. If you have Esri, then you can use the find identical GP tool. And in data reviewer, you can use the duplicate geometry check. Multi-part features can cause trouble as well. To check for them, you can use the part counter transformer in FME. In Esri, you can use the add geometry attribute geoprocessing tool, and if you have the data reviewer, the multi-polygon check. Finally, another check you may want to run is to verify that the water surface elevations increase or decrease with the stream station IDs. If you have Data Reviewer, you can run the monotonicity check, which checks that the M and Z values strictly increase or decrease. Performing such a check in geospatially may be very difficult, but tabularly, you can look at the stream station IDs and how they relate to the water surface elevations, which makes the check much easier. So we applied some of those best practices and used few of the checks to automate the creation of FEMA's changes since last firm dataset. So let's take a look how we applied those checks. For those of you who are not familiar with the changes since last firm, it is a layer that shows the current flood maps and how they will be impacted by the preliminary maps. It shows areas where there is changes and what those changes are. In yellow are the increases, in purple are the decreases. We used the FME to automate the process. We started with the effective and the preliminary NFHL layers. We cleaned up the data by using the geometry validator tool in FME, and we combined both layers into a single layer. We created a mapping layer which contained the information on what is an increase versus a decrease, and we use that to determine if the change is increase or decrease. For example, if it was zone A to a zone AE, then it would be considered an increase. And if it was a zone A to a zone X, it will be a decrease. You can see our workspace in FME. We use the geometry validator first to make sure that the data is clean. We removed any issues before we even started processing. Then we use the generalizer. It's a useful way to reduce some of the complexity in your data. It removes some of the vertices. If you have a very complex geometry, it might not make sense to process all the different vertices. So generalizer is a good way to get rid of some of that extra noise. And then we used area on area overlayer, where we were able to combine both the NFHL, the National Flood Hazard Layer effective flood maps with the preliminary flood maps. And now we had both data sets in the same layer. And then we used the mapping file to calculate the changes since last firm. So at the end, the data was written in a file geodatabase format. We published it on ArcGIS server with the symbology that you can see in the screenshot here. You can easily see the yellow, which is an increase, the purple, which is a decrease. And you can also download those data sets through the GIS service. So again, we used FME because it was able to read from different formats. We had to read in from the NFHL, the effective service, and then we also had to read in data from the preliminary NFHL. We had to read in the CSV, which was that mapping file of zone X versus zone A, and how is that an increase or decrease? We also sped up the development that way because FME is just drag and drop functionality. There was no coding involved. We used the transformers there to detect the GIS errors, correct some issues before we made the analysis. We also leverage the FME server. We can schedule jobs to automate the creation process, and that was really saving a lot of effort for everyone because it was automated. With that, we're ready to take on your questions. Thank you very much. Thank you to Eliza and Dan for bringing us home with the final presentation of the session. See, we're waiting for questions to come in, and I haven't seen any yet. So please make sure you're typing those in as you're thinking of them. Just get them in there. I guess in the meantime, I can throw out a question there about challenges that you may have run into during the creation of the changes since last firm layer and related to the size of the data. Anything that you can say about that? Yeah, sure. I can take a first stab at answering that. So we did have some challenges when we were creating the changes since last firm. It was a pretty large data set that we worked with. So in order to be able to do the compilation, we had to remove some of the vertices and smooth out the data. And then we also scheduled jobs to run overnight on FME, which was convenient. We didn't have to have people running anything. And it was just processing overnight when there was more bandwidth from the servers. And then for visualization, we created various scales for the layers, so that when you're turning them on and off, the ones that we had oversimplified were at the national level. And then when you zoom in to the state level, we had a different layer that turns on at that scale that was a little bit more detailed. And then we had another layer that was turning on when you go to the county level when you want to see all the details. So then you had more vertices there, but that helped with displaying the layer nationally and also showing it, and performance was good when we did that.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, in part of the presentation, I talked about understanding your users and their needs. And with the idea that this is going to get presented in FEMA's flood map changes viewer, the largest scale that FEMA's maps are issued on is 6,000 scale, right? 1 inch equals 500 feet. A line, a flood hazard boundary line at that scale is, you know, like 7.5 real world feet or something like that. So if you have a sliver polygon of some change from a political boundary shift that's 5 feet across, it doesn't register, right? There's no point in kind of clogging up your processing and clogging up your data services, query ability, and so forth beyond that. So.
Thanks, guys. Another question came in from Diana. For changes since last firm, can you repeat what is considered an increase and what is considered a decrease? I think of it as elevation in area, but I think you mentioned zone change.
Yeah, it could be either or. There's in FEMA's technical references, everything that was on the screen earlier and everything that we built is really just automating what has been in FEMA's non-regulatory product technical references. And there is one for the flood risk database, which kind of lays out, you know, what determines increases and decreases. And I think, as Eliza had an example, going from not a special flood hazard area, right? Something like a zone X shaded or unshaded to a special flood hazard area would be considered an increase. There's actually 4 different categories of increase. I think there's floodway increase, SFHA increase, non-SFHA increase, because you could go from unshaded X to shaded X. And then coastal is the 4th one. And there's actually 4 different symbologies in that yellow and purple that the system had to create. Well, 4 different categorizations. And then of course, you know, the service renders it a certain way. But then the elevation is yet another component of it. So you have 2 zones that are maybe the same, but if there's a static elevation increase, that would also be increased. The data today, as the previous presentation showed, it's all vector data. So it's not smart enough to understand really a BFE change, because those are line features, right? And we're talking about polygons of change. So, you know, in the future, as we graduate more to 2D, then maybe we could show those grid increase or decrease areas. But right now with the classic firm database vector data, it's going to be in the polygon space only for those static elevation increases or decreases.
And I just wanted to mention that there is changes since last firm for preliminary data and also for draft data. So there is 2 different layers too that you can access, and you can put them into your own ArcGIS software. It could be QGIS, just like the presentation before showed, or it could be ArcGIS, ArcMap.
Okay. Jennifer asked if you could talk a bit more about how FME works.
Yeah, sure. FME, the way it works is there is 2 different things you can do. One of them is the desktop version, and there is the server option too. You need the desktop version. Even if you're going to use server to like process some of the jobs, you still need the desktop version. And what it does, it looks very much like a model builder. If you're familiar with model builder in ArcGIS, it allows you to pull in different functions that are already pre-done for you. So it's just a drag and drop transformer functionality, and then you select the data input that you want to connect to, and then you select the output, what kind of format you want to have it. You can do a lot of manipulations with FME too. There is the toolbox itself has like transformers, that's what they call them. and you can connect them. It can pull in data from all kinds of formats. So if you have some data in Oracle, if you have some in a shapefile and some in CSV, and you want to make it into a geospatial data set, for example, you have like lat long points, all of that, you can do all of that within FME. It's really neat when it comes to like connecting different data sets and converting them, doing some processing. For example, you want to clean up the data, you only care about some parts of the data, you want to, if you're working for a county, for example, you don't care about the entire, you can clip the data within FME, it's geospatially like aware. So that's also really nice. I'm not sure if Dan, you want to add something else?
No, I think you got it. Well done.
Yeah, and if you have any more questions, feel free to shoot me an email and we can talk more about it.
Yeah, and if there's questions for, you guys thought of questions for the other presenters as well, please refer to the program narrative for email addresses, and they've invited you all to shoot them as many emails as you want to on all the questions that you have. Dan, I wanted to just make sure, did you have any additional intel to share regarding disadvantages to using QGIS in Esri? Or I thought I may have picked up a comment about that, but.
I do not. Eliza may, and I'll pass it to her in a second. What I did chime in on the previous presentation was, I think a Clark asked a question about publicly available FEMA data services. I threw it into the chat, which may have been archived, but it's really easy to find again. Hazards.fema.gov is like that MIP URL. If you're not familiar with it, I'll say it again, hazards.fema.gov. On there, there is a tools and links page, and we took over the top right link. So it's very easy. I don't know which way you guys are seeing, left and right. Top, it says GIS services, things like NFHL. And when you go there, it has the URLs for draft, for prelim, for pending, all those national layers, and then draft CSLF and prelim CSLF. And all of those are publicly available and can be brought into a QGIS or an Esri desktop to do as you, and they all have predetermined symbologies and predetermined label classes and all that kind of stuff. And I hand it to Eliza to see if she has anything on QGIS versus Esri differences.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on QGIS. One of the things that comes to mind as the workforce available for each one of those tools. From what I've seen for QGIS, it seems similar to ArcMap and ArcGIS. I think there is a lot of powerful toolboxes in ArcGIS. The other thing is that a lot of people are being trained with ArcGIS, right? If you're coming right out of college, a lot of college programs are training folks with Esri, and maybe that's changing now. When I was in college, which was a while back, we all used Esri software, and that's what you come out with. You had a lot of experience running the tools there. You were familiar with everything that's available. And when you're trying to hire people, it's easier to find folks that are familiar with ArcMap and not necessarily with QGIS.
Well, I, for one, made a mental note that I'm going to put it on my kids' laptop and have them prepared with QGIS before they even get to college. So thank you for the input there. And thank you, Dan and Eliza, for the presentation, and to all our presenters, for the work that you've put in, developing the abstracts, the presentations, your willingness to get on camera and share it with everybody out there. And finally, thank you to the folks behind the curtain at Falcon Events. You folks out there watching may not be aware, but behind all of your presenters and all of your moderators, there's this team of technicians who really make this entire conference flow. They're in our ears telling us what to do, when to do it. And without them, we would have, I don't know what it would look like. So thank you. And with that, I think we are the only thing standing in between you and wherever your next beverage is, probably downstairs. So thank you. Enjoy the conference, or hope you enjoyed the conference, and we'll see you next year.